I long for the friendship, I long for the true friendship. I long for the contortions of true boiling, the raging, the raving, the raging friendship. I long for the body of raging friendship. Come on.
He would have patience until a sentence would find its tone, its line, its range of resonance. They would stand still until a sentence would achieve its range of resonance.
There is a definition of will that is rather like the wind around the branches. There is a definition of will that is rather like the wind moving the branches. One stands in the purified domain beyond imagination, beyond the limits of this imagination, beyond the restrictive morphologies of image, of space, of this language creating a body. One steps beyond this naive territory.
They would observe, thus, weathers of meaning. They would stand, thus, observing the weathers of intent, standing clear in observing the weathers of meaning.
One can step beyond this naive territory. One can attain the muscles and the determination to step beyond this naive definition of existence.
They would remember thus the suffering of my child relates to confusion about identity. The suffering of my child lies strictly in this place. The suffering of my child lies strictly in this confusion related to what the responsibility of one's domain is.
One can get the right limbs, the claws, the wings that can pierce through distorted images of identity, that can pierce through distorted images of identity, so that will becomes exact, so that will becomes exact.
They would train one another in finding the experiential roots of any piece of clear truth. They would train in this they would train one another in this kind of patience that is able to trace back the experiential complexity, the experiential configuration of the attainment of a truth, a fruit of insight.
So that will can take any form of body required. So that will may take any form of body required. So that exact, purified, clarified will may take any body required. Any kind of morphology of body required.
I am stubborn thus, together with you. I am stubborn in finding you wherever you may hide. I am stubborn in finding you wherever you may hide. I am stubborn in finding you wherever you may hide. I'm stubborn with my foot searching for the ground of a vow.
One steps into the irreversible. They have spread the field of the irreversible, which is renouncing the common field of imagination, renouncing this common definition of identity. There is a field, there is a landscape of the irreversible that they have attained together. There is a ground, a landscape of the irreversible that they have attained together. When one is thoroughly disciplined in piercing through this naive spaciousness of identity, this naive spaciousness of objective identity, they were able to advance with their wings, cutting through the flesh of this naive identity. They perfected their dances of these dragon wings that can cut through misleading images.
The fragrance with which I recognize you, the fragrance in which I recognize you, the fragrance, the violent wind of resurrection in which I can recognize your anger.
Thus, their true friendship was finally possible. Thus, their friendship was finally possible. Thus, their true bodies, adequately attained bodies, were finally united onto this ground. The domain of purified geometry of will, this domain of advanced travel, this domain of achieved, attained, clarified, stabilized travel, this
I asked myself, what is our adventure today? I asked them, what is our adventure today? What are the hands of prayer to listen to?
they achieved the fluid substance of clarified will. They achieved the clarified substance of this will that is simply the discernment of the membranes of pure enticement. They were able to stand in these disciplines of patience that allow one to observe motions of territories, motions of logical territories, observe the grounds of will. They stood in the classrooms of advanced patience so as to discern the grounds of the true grounds of will, come on. They started to grow these forests of friends, these morphologies of friendship. They started to grow symphonies like morphologies of friendship. They started to grow these sounds, these calls that could unite various types of position into various scales of function. The calls into function, the calls into function.
Somehow I knew you can listen. Somehow my feet were both onto the same ground. Somehow my feet stepped into clarity about the nature of this space. Somehow my feet together searching for the clarity of such posture. Somehow the purpose became clear. Somehow the purpose became clear thus. I spoke to you thus. I spoke to you saying, these branches that you taught me, these branches that you taught me are not here just for clearing space. These branches that you told me about are not here just for clearing space. The branches that you told me about, the branches that you brought about in my dream, the branches that you brought about are not just for clearing the ground.
Motions of calls, callings, aspirations, desire, the motions in their limbs, in each of their limbs, the motions in each of their limbs, the motions in each of their limbs, each little species of
every single breath that is in the absurdity of this every single breath placed in the absurd nature of this space. Every single breath following
will perfectly clarified in their intelligent spaciousness, each one in their own space, each one given their own spaciousness, each motion of will in their very muscles, given their own type of geometry, their own type of mathematics,
shall become your body. Every single sentence of inadequate motion of will, every single sentence of this inadequate breathing will become a perfect measure.
each tendency, each impulse, each calling, each kind of pain amplified into its true dignity, each kind of pain amplified into its true dignity, each kind of voice amplified in its true nature, each kind of voice in every instinct, every tendency, every calling in your very flesh, in your very muscles, in the very fibers of tendency, each one amplified and clarified to the realization of their ground of possibility, to the complete body of their possibility, thus the complete achievement of their attained sky. Each one reaching their complete story in every fiber, every instinctual impulse, every residual impulse attaining its complete love story, its complete desire.
For the bones that you need, for the bones that you grow, every breath that is placed inadequate to the world, every breath that is happening in a realm that is not seen, every breath of will, growing finally like a tree. Every breath of will that is not in the gravity of this simple common story. Every breath that is placed in a different angle with its spine searching otherwise. Every breath that is somehow placed in an absurd direction. Will become a pillar. Every such breath will become a pillar of
desire. It's encounter of revelation. Let us create these bodies that can host such diversity of spaces, such diversity of morphologies of life, morphologies of destiny, morphologies of story. Let us find this advanced paradox, this mathematics of paradox, this thrill of paradox, this thrill of narrative contrast, the achievement of each life imprisoned inside of our domain.
the desire you need to find my body. every such desire for transparency, every such grip of a space that is forbidden, every such grip of a texture of possibility that is not perceived in the world. Every such stubborn sentence that has no resonance, no echo in the world, every such sentence that has no precedent in this domain will become a bone, a pillar of this structure. Every such sentence that has no precedent will become a pillar, an honored spine.
These friends met onto this ground and they have decided in the very dignity of such architectures of a vow, in the very dignity of such alloy of standing, in the very dignity of such alloy of posture, in the very dignity of such caliber of patience, in the very monumental spaciousness, the very generosity of such a patience, in the very generosity of such a patience, they have decided to stand in this new kingdom of friendship, in this new kingdom of friendship, in this new kingdom of friendship, in this new kingdom of friendship. They have decided to stand onto the ground of the irreversible, which means to not accept the small gifts of confused, distorted, misguided.
Every such night spent in the intoxication of the dialogues of despair, every such night training the bones with the clear silver intoxication of despair. Every such night spent training this body.
They have decided to stand together in this kind of the white fields of the irreversible, the white fields of the irreversible, tasting the very holding together the discipline of such a possibility, holding together the discipline of such a possible discipline.
Every such sentence.
To withstand the dark substance of death all around, to withstand, to taste, to desire the black substance of ignorance all around you, so as to be awakened into the irreversible, to rather taste the stench of ignorance, to devour the stench of ignorance as the discipline of the irreversible, to stand in the irreversible. They placed this vow as a ground of encounter.
Every such peculiar kind of guilt will become the stretch of embrace.
To become intoxicated with the stench of ignorance, to become intoxicated with
every act of discouraging the delusion of common existence shall become a sentence of a truly relevant embrace. A face that has no precedent, a face, a form of encounter with no precedent, trained by these sentences.
the screams of ignorance, to finally awaken to the deafening screams of ignorance in the very tunnel of time, the concrete of the black tunnel of time that is all around in this very
every torture of refusal of
bright day, in the very bright spaciousness of the small freedom,
distorted kinds of care, every torture of discernment, every sentence of discernment that is felt as
this small freedom of the individual space, this small freedom of this misguided infinity,
will slowly train you in the generosity of
they have decided to stand together and
sentences broadcast.
awakening one another. They stand together, awakening one another into this greed for devouring.
Sentence broadcast. A body finally broadcast.
The prayers of ignorance, devouring the prayers of ignorance, devouring the attained screams of ignorance all around, devouring the unscreamed screams of ignorance that produce this very corpse of the common story, of the ordinary, this common substance of paralysis, this common substance of paralysis. They were awakening one another into the greed for devouring ignorance, devouring continuously, devouring ignorance, continuously devouring this dark flesh of ignorance, continuously devouring this dark flesh of ignorance. They have awakened to such a friendship, they have awakened to such a friendship. And how did they find the fuel for the beasts, the contemplative beasts of such harvest? Their complete domains, how did they find the fuel? And how did they find the fuel for these beastly bodies, able to harvest, able to harvest? finally able to harvest, to step into the flesh of the harvest. They were next to one another in such kind of joy. They were next to one another in membranes of joy that are not easy to conceive of. They were next to one another in membranes of advanced enticement, advanced arousal of faculties. They were next to one another in the motions of these membranes of advanced arousal of enticement. They were somehow next to one another like pieces of a puzzle, like reminders of the depths of pain, like reminders, continuous reminders of the unscreamed screams, continuous wells of unscreamed screams for one another, continuous reminders, echoes of the unattained, unachieved, unaware screams. They were reminders for one another.
Precisely the way I can forget about you, precisely this was the ground of determination. Precisely the way I can forget about you now. Precisely the way I can forget about you now, with lines of variable weight, lines of variable alloys of determination. Precisely the possibility of forgetting was the ground of determination. Precisely this possibility of forgetting. The forgetting of who I was here. The forgetting of what our world was. The book that we opened here. The book that we opened together here The Kind Mother of terror, of fright. A kind possibility of such vast domains of forgetting.
What was the courageous thing to do? What was the fucking courageous thing to do? What was the courageous thing to do? They were embodied screams for one another. They were close to one another thus, in this vast art of contrast, this vaster art of contrast. They stood in the morphology of contrast thus. They stood thus in the vast arts of paradox, in
all the fragile forms of forgetting, all these fragile shapes of sentences that feel like memory, and yet they are precisely of the nature of forgetting. The ways I could not stand in this landscape.
Without knowing, with parts, with sides of them, they never knew, with sides of their sight, with eyes opened onto the sides of their destiny, they never knew, with eyes opened onto the slopes of their destiny, they never knew, with eyes opened they could taste.
This tree made up of sentences in this angle. This tree made up of sentences produced thus together. This tree burning like this. This tree that burned its voice. This tree that burned its longing like this. Shall be heard. This tree that burned thus, this tree that burned thus will be heard. This tree that burned thus shall be heard. This tree with its branches shall be heard.
The meaning of the posture of the breath of the other, with the meaning of the posture of the breath of the other, the meaning of the contortions of the other, they could just simply understand the architectures of how they would just contrast one another, contrast.
This tree shall show its fruits.
The mirrors, the shattered,
in the appropriate time.
Shattered surfaces of their destinies, how they would join these shattered fucking mirrors, destinies, surfaces, slopes, sides, how they would simply necessarily, how they would necessarily attain the symphony of such contrast. how they would just become intoxicated with advanced
The way we burn.
contrasts that would become paradoxical gates, gates of paradox. Unknowingly, sides, types, mathematics, fabrics, species of flesh of their own bodies that they did not know about. They could now observe how their symphonies would be shaped. Their symphonies would be shaped in such masterful definitions of orchestras of desired contrast, orchestras of the weight they could carry, orchestras of the screams they could scream, their thoroughly attained screams of honesty. The places where the blood of true identity, the ground of true identity would just surge outward into this blood would surge outward, these fucking contortions of destiny, these contortions of unusual destinies, unusual motions of destiny, how they would just meet in such sudden, violent, paradoxical, scathing, painful ways. They would meet in such painful ways. They would just meet their sides. They would have their sides unite in dances, painful dances, vast architectures of painful clashes of contortions of destiny, painful clashes of contortions of destiny. The way in which they were painfully faithful, the ways in which they could be painfully faithful to the hearing of earthquakes underground, earthquakes of will, the listening to earthquakes of will underground, the listening to the earthquakes of will, the listening, the hearing of the resonance of earthquakes of will, earthquakes of alien species of will, alien species of destiny motions, alien species of thrusts of will, alien species of motions in one's destiny. You would find such hands that would weave destinies in unusual manners, weave them with this kind of contorted motions, so as to show the needed nuances, 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 so as to open eyes on the sides of their slopes, so as to open eyes with pulls and pushes of destiny that they were not yet able to discern, to speak, to scream, to shout, to desire.
Every sentence still resounding in the void, still searching for the choirs, those choirs of friendship. Still searching for the path of birth, still desperately longing to get lost in truth with no way back, still hoping with the fingers upwards to reach a true definition of the skies. Still testing directions, still hunting the impossible. Still hunting the impossible thus. Still listening to the voices of fractures.
Architectures of will they were not aware of. Architectures of will they were not aware of. Tastes, this greed, this intoxication, this thorough intoxication with awareness of sides of destiny, just observing species of geometries of will, how they shape one's destiny in such intricate, advanced ways.
Still hunting for the impossible, still intoxicated by the laughter roars of pain, still intoxicated by the fragrance of error, still intoxicated by the fragrance of a truly noble error. Still intoxicated by the possibility of a stance. Still intoxicated with the possibility of an adequate stance. Still intoxicated with freedom.
So how did they become able to write, to produce logics capable for such contemplation? How did they produce the languages? How did they produce the languages? How did they produce the stories? How did they produce such stories? How did they produce such ink? How did they attain this ink capable to contain the necessary letters, capable to tame these wild pupils of fierce sight, the sight of any side of your destiny, the sight opened onto any slope of your destiny, the sight that is opened onto the membranes of the limit of reality, this new kind of sight that is like a landscape of resonance with species of influence, these vast types of weathers of influence. They now awakened to breathe such air, to breathe such intoxicating perfumes of possible stories, such intoxicating motions.
Still searching for the milk that can reach the caves, still searching for that milk that can reach into the deeper caves of joy, still searching for that milk that can feed the bodies of that deep joy, still searching for my friends, thus still searching for the stones, the bodies for my friends, thus still here, still here, still here, searching for the bodies for my friends, still here, searching for their dances, listening to their dances underneath. Still kindly absurd, still learning the body of a field, still learning the mind of a field, still learning the craft of obstinate prayer, still crafting the obstinacy of a new logical patience, still blindly groping some form for desire, still blindly groping that shape of desire. still blindly groping for a new face.
They would just give their gifts. They would just spontaneously, in thin air, spontaneously in the flesh of the ordinary, they would just open the fountains of clarified wisdom. They would just open fountains in mid-air. They would just simply open fountains in mid-air. They would just, like, in this clear, simple space, they would just open deep fountains of desired clear water.
Still training in the right kind of fatherly discouragement. Still training in discouraging sentences from their naive direction. Still training in this discouragement of sentences from their naive direction. Still placing my hands in the air in the hope for a body of mind, in the hope for a body of pure mind, still searching for the motions of this animal of space, still listening to the brutal sentences of desire swarming in the caves underneath. Like a gathering of elders, like a gathering of elders. All of their gifts gathered in circular dances, their gifts, each gift of ignorance, each of the gifts of ignorance. It was as if the landscape with its caves and its fields became library. It was as if the very prison of distance turned into the desired body. It was as if the very iron, the weight of the iron of distance became this body of memory we did not have.
They would dance close to one another, thus they would just dance like buildings. They would just clash into advanced destinies like buildings, like institutions, like bodies of culture, like bodies of mission, like structures of universes. They would just lovingly clash into one another in vast dances of vaster dances would just clash into one another. They would just lovingly sustain one another with the nourishment of exact substances of pain, of ignorance, of their achieved artfulness, of screaming their art into the world, screaming their pain into the world, skillfully screaming their pain into the world by these spastic, through their art, through their struggle of getting born, they would achieve these motions, unusual motions, motions in their destiny that were not prescribed by any common language. They were not prescribed by any shape of common will. Those morphologies, those tumors in their destiny that were not prescribed by any common geometry of will, by any common shape of will, with these tumors of the inadequate, the most scathing, painful protrusions, these scathing motions in their destiny, this is how they were able to meet. This is how they were able to sustain and to nourish one another with this unusual contrast of misunderstood destinies, these misunderstood destinies.
Continuously you find this drive. Continuously you are thrown out of the world by this quest. Continuously you throw yourself out of any home because of this one. continuously.
So how did they awaken to this greed for depth? How did they attain such languages for the symphony of the vaster adventure, the higher adventure, the deeper adventure, the secret adventure, the sacred adventure, this unfathomable scale of adventure? Just simply their sides, those sides of the harvest of their pain, the harvest of their achieved screams would nourish the motions in another type of body. They would nourish one another through their achieved screams. They would simply nourish one another through their
You place the improbable seeds in the air. You place seeds in the air.
achieved equations of insight, achieved equations of insight. They would just nourish one another in this beastly feast, this beastly body of a feast, this beastly morphology of a contemplative feast. Vaster contemplation of the species of destiny that would come together in such unusual ways, unusually painful ways. So how could they stand in honoring the very gifts they had for one another? How were they able to stand in honoring the very taste of the gifts, the nourishment they had for one another? How could they withstand the heavy metals, the heavy substances that they were gifting one another? Tell me, how could they withstand the heavy, toxic metals of the gifts, the nourishment they had for one another? How could they withstand such encounters? How did they awaken to this empire of such an unusual taste of contrast, such unusual species of will that was just redefined in the most unexpected, fiercely adequate, fiercely painful, and fiercely ecstatic manner? This redefining of the mathematics of will in the most painfully adequate way. This redefining of their craft of will, their mathematical shape of will in the most painfully exact, like the cunning, the subversive, their awakening into the subversive acid will, this subversive acid will, this subversive acid will that was the very type of venom their contorted vessels longed for. Their contortions in the stretch for the sap, their contortions of roots in just piercing through the rocks, piercing through the rocks and achieving those contortions in the quest for the sap. The very taste of contortion, the very taste of crashing your skull into naked stone, the very taste of crushing your sight, crushing the mirror of your sight into the chest of ignorance, crushing the skull of your sight into the very chest of ignorance, this concrete, overwhelming, overpowering chest of ignorance, just continuously crushing these mirrors of distorted sight into the loving chest of ignorance, into the loving concrete of ignorance. How are they able to discern one another such? How could they just awaken to such unusual taste, this unusual taste of will that would make them become like armies of breakthrough, armies of rebellious morphologies of will, armies of rebellious types of bones, armies of rebellious species of will. I wanted to really taste how these bodies could work. I wanted to really taste how these bodies could work. How such families of behavior would really find one another.